You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share part of my culture on a solo show. Ladies and gents, I believe this is the first episode of 2022. I took a little bit of a holiday break. As I've said in the past, my job has been kind of crazy. I'm doing the work of 3 people by myself, plus the holidays, plus COVID stuff. It's just been absolutely insane. But my guest VG Ambassador with me today is not only a repeat VG Ambassador, but a very patient gentleman as well, as we've been trying to get this show done for a very, very long time. Mr. Chris Murray, how are you doing, sir?
Good. Happy to be here. Yeah, I'm very excited to finally get this show off the ground.
Yeah, so other VGM podcast community members might remember Alex the Messenger did a Falcom. It was a Trails of Cold Steel episode with you. Yeah, way back, I don't know, October, September?
Sounds right.
Quite a way back in 1803 on the VGM Journey. So, and that was a great show. You guys played a lot of great tunes from the series. And so a companion piece to that show was supposed to be a general Falcom show between you and me, and my schedule just backed up because I was slowing down with episodes, and I had a large line of people that wanted to do shows with me, so we finally got around to this one. If you haven't heard the VGM Journey episode and you want to, you can go back and listen to it, or, just refresh your memory, and just pretend that this happened right after that one. So we've got a ton of cool Falcom tracks to listen to. I myself am not a huge RPG guy, especially not a huge JRPG guy. A lot of these soundtracks and Falcom soundtracks in general are pieces of music that I will listen to kind of independently from the games. But Chris, you've got a long and storied history with Falcom, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, for me, VGM introduced me to Falcom. Our mutual friend Purnell is a huge Falcom guy, and I remember hearing him play some music from East, and I was like, well, this sounds amazing. And then he talked about the game, and I was like, I've literally never heard of this company. I've never heard of these RPGs, and I've been playing RPGs my whole life. I'm like, well, I don't know. I just haven't been paying attention to this. And so the music really resonated, and then I played Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana, and it blew my mind. And then I just sort of went on a big dive into some Falcom games, particularly the Trails of Cold Steel series.
Okay, so you are more of a later adopter than I thought. I thought maybe you had some early experience with them. That kind of, I guess, explains your choices on the show versus my choices on the show. I think you picked a lot of the newer, like streaming audio, CD quality audio stuff. I went very, very old school. I think 4 out of my 5 picks are just FM jams from obscure Japanese computers and games that you've probably never heard of before. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun kind of going back and forth between your high energy modern stuff and I picked like some, I'm not going to say experimental tracks, but they're kind of more low, like chill out kind of tracks that fit really well in like RPG towns or kind of like gloomy atmospheres. It was just kind of the mood I was in when I was picking music. So I think we're going to have kind of a roller coaster of a show, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I peaked a bit, and I am familiar with a couple of the games, but I haven't played them, so I'm excited to go in a little blind to see what we have. But I do think we'll have a pretty interesting dichotomy back and forth.
Yeah, for sure. I'm hoping that my more simple older tracks hold up against your like grand rock orchestra tracks, but we'll see how it works.
One of the amazing things about Falcom is they either use phrases or parts of themes throughout the series of games, and the games twist and overlap, and so they've been using pieces and melodies for like 20 plus years, and so it's pretty amazing to hear early games in different series and hear the similar themes repeated. And then they have just, I think, a pretty amazing way about them where they capture a couple moments in the way those games work very similarly, even if their songs are very different and the games are very different. So I'm interested to see if we get like this reminds me of this game that I've played from them, because they're giving you the same energy. They're trying to tell you the same story.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I totally follow you on that. There are a couple of tracks that I've picked that I'm like, oh, I definitely hear some Ys in here. And especially growing up with the Ys 3 Wanderers from Ys soundtrack on the SNES, that was one of my childhood favorites. I do hear a lot of those kind of phrasing and tone in nearly all Falcom soundtracks. Like, that was such an influential soundtrack, I think, for a lot of the composers that came after Mieko Ishikawa and Yuzo Koshiro and kind of the founders of the Falcom sound. So it's going to be fun to go through these and kind of pick those parts out of these pieces of music.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so what do you say we start off with one of your tracks? What do you have for us first today?
I grabbed a track. There's a couple of the tracks that I picked which are actually arrangements off of the original games, because these games have often been re-released plenty of times. This one is called Burning Sword from Ys Memories of Celceta, originally released on the PS Vita in 2012, and then later on the PS4 in 2019. Originally composed by Atsushi Shirakawa of the Falcom Sound Team JDK, and this arrangement was done by Takahiro Unisuga, also from the Falcom Sound Team JDK.
Right on.
Welcome back. That was Burning Sword from Ys Memories of Celceta, originally for the PS Vita in 2012. PS4 in 2019. Originally composed by Atsushi Shirakawa, arranged by Takahiro Unisuga, both from the Falcom sound team JDK.
Great tune. And I think it's a great tune to bring the show in with, too, because it's kind of very quintessentially like Falcom. It's got all that stuff in there, that like kind of chuggy guitars with a little bit of soloing going on, some keyboards over it, and just that kind of driving, positive beat.
Yeah, I mean, that you kind of nailed it, right? I mean, and I said earlier, Falcom has sort of these moves they use, and this like these plays, and this is a classic one of those. This is an Ys game. Adol, like, it's a professional adventurer. They're action RPGs. You kind of all start in like a new world, and then there's always a moment where it's like, okay, now go, adventurer away. And this is the track that plays. It's like the first track when you sort of like get to go out into the world, and it just like nails that vibe of, yeah, this makes me want to run around this like weird island that I have to map and report back and like explore as much as I can and just run around and action RPG my way through the world. And the first Ys game I ever played has this track, Sunshine Coastline, which is a song that I'll basically request every time the VGM podcast allows me to request a song. But it has the same vibe, right? It's just like, it's like the perfect song to just set off on an adventure and start your journey.
Yeah, and Adol always starts off his journeys with kind of a very wide-eyed optimism in nearly all of the games, except for maybe the ones where he's a little too shipwrecked. Because he's always shipwrecked, but sometimes he's a little too shipwrecked.
Yeah.
And then it starts off on a little bit of a more negative tone, but especially on this one where he's just like, I've got my mission, I'm going to go do it. This one was a remake of Ys 4, is that what it was?
Yeah, it has like I can't recall off the top of my head the like original name, but Memories of Celceta is the sort of remastered name of it.
Yeah.
But this one, a bunch of them he has amnesia. This one he has amnesia, and you like run into your big blue buddy, which is always also a staple of these Ys games.
Dogi, yep.
The like president of the place that you happen to wake up in is like, for some reason they haven't explored the totality of the area, and it's like too dangerous, and so she's like, look, I'll help you, I don't know who you are, but you got to do this for me. And so you have to go and literally cover the map and report back. And so that's sort of how it starts. And so you don't know where you're going, you don't know why. You get this song and just run around until, you happen into places with story arcs and story events.
That's cool. And it sounds fun. It sounds way more open world than a lot of the kind of other JRPGs or they're very kind of, linear at the beginning, and then the world finally opens up. This one sounds like you've got more of an open world, but it's more of a secretive open world where you don't know where there's no like giant map that you can explore already and say, oh, I want to head towards that waterfall. Just like, hey, I'm going to go in that direction. Maybe there's a waterfall, maybe there's not. Who knows?
Yeah, it feels like Zelda in a way where you have to get to certain places in order to unlock certain parts, but you can effectively go wherever you want to with whatever you have at the moment. And you don't have to collect the characters in the exact same way. You don't have to do all the missions in each city. Like, you can come back to them, you can do all sorts of stuff. So it does give you that more open world adventure vibe than a turn-based JRPG would, for sure.
Sounds fun. I played a lot of the remaster that came before this, the one based on Ys 3, Oath and Felghana, and I really enjoyed it. And I know this one is kind of similar, at least in terms of like gameplay and like, that kind of isometric viewpoint that you have in the game. So, I don't know, maybe I'll check this one out at some point.
Yeah.
It's on the PS4, so I can definitely play it.
It's fun.
Yeah, no, it sounds fun. Especially that exploration. Like, I know I talked about SnowRunner a lot and playing, like, truck games, but SnowRunner is very similar, where you start off on just this open world and everything's black, and you literally have to map out the world, find out where all the cool stuff is, and then go do the missions, and you're kind of struggling the whole way. So this sounds very much similar, believe it or not, but you're fighting RPG style and action RPG instead of, trying to fight your way up mountains with winches and, steel beams on your trunk and stuff like that. So,
yeah, for sure.
Interesting parallel. All right, so we're going to start off my picks with an oldie but a goodie. This one is called Grievously Shrine, which I love that name. This is from Sorcerian Tsuka Scenario Volume 3 Pyramid Sorcerian. So this was kind of like a I guess in modern terms you would call it a DLC pack. It was just an extra set of scenarios that you can purchase for the original Sorcerian game. I believe this also has the distinction of being the first Sharp X1 Turbo track we've ever played on the show. This was released in 1988, composed by the grandmother of Falcom music, Mieko Ishikawa. You're going to hear a lot of Ys music similarities in here, so let's give it a listen. Alright, that was Grievously Shrine from Sorcerian Tsuika Scenario Volume 3 Pyramid Sorcerian, released on the Sharp X1 Turbo in 1988, composed by Mieko Ishikawa. Quite a nice little FM jam. This uses the YM2151 that the Sharp X68000 is famous for having, along with the YM2149 sampler, which I don't think was used as much in this song, but they probably used it for other more pick-up-y, battle-y kind of tracks. What'd you think of this one?
It was great. I really loved... I guess for me it felt like a flute, but it was basically the second melody. They weren't sort of like doing a call and repeat, but they were doing like an A and a B. And that flute melody, which was the second one, I thought was just great. And then like I said during the break, the runs were just so great. It just sort of keeps going, and it felt like controlled chaos. Like it was like kind of like a real musician just sort of like feeling it and just going and going, and then they just kept going, and it was great.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, this is called Pyramid Sorcerian because this whole scenario takes place in Egypt and other areas of the Middle East. So I think they were really trying to go for kind of like a Middle Eastern flute, like a snake charmy kind of a sound going on there. And I think a lot of those runs were... I don't think it's really region authentic. It's got a lot of JRPG flair kind of mixed in, but I think there's just a little bit of that Middle Eastern influence there to go along with it. And you're right, it's got an A section and a B section, and the instruments change up quite a bit. It doesn't do a whole lot in terms of like fancy layering and stuff. It keeps it kind of simple, but I think that's one of Mieko Ishikawa's strengths, is that she just writes really, really good melodies that kind of stick with you. And I do recognize a lot of her work on the Ys series in these tunes as well. Just like the key and the pitch and just the notes that she stays within when she's running these solos are all very, very, early Ys music pieces. So it's got that Falcom sound for sure.
Yeah, it just feels like quality melody after quality melody, and that she doesn't even have to change too much, but just the instrumentation and then letting the instruments do sort of what they would do with the essence of the melody that the song is putting out there. I think is really well done.
Yeah, and so much of creating a good song on FM chips is creating great instruments as well, and I think she just chose a whole bunch of really nice, rich-sounding instruments to work with, even with a limited number of channels. And again, one of her trademarks, and she worked so well with that, and especially like I said, I grew up with the Ys 3 on the SNES, and the instrument set on that game was amazing. She was the primary composer on that as well. So I think she just had a really good ear for what instruments to use for which pieces of music, and that helped her out so much. Have you ever played any of the earlier Sorcerian games?
No, I've never even heard of them. But I basically am going to take our Google Doc and be like, all right, I got to play some of these games.
So yeah, it's part of the Xanadu series, from what I understand. There's like this big, long kind of... There's like Legend of Heroes is kind of in with this whole thing too. And then Sorcerian was like a sequel to that series of games and then kind of branched off on its own thing. These particular games play... Visually, they look kind of like Ys 3. It's like a side-scrolling RPG-style action game where you roam through towns and in side view, and it's got Metroidvania-esque exploration areas where you run into monsters and stuff and kind of choose your own path on the way through. So it's neat in that respect because the graphics are really detailed. Like the X1 Turbo was the predecessor to the Sharp X68000, so you can kind of think of it as like if the X68000 is more akin to like a Genesis or a Mega Drive, the X1 was maybe more like the NES version of that. So much more limited color palette, kind of Master System style graphics.
Right.
So if you can imagine kind of like a prototypical Ys 3 on the Master System, I guess you'd have a good idea for what the visuals here were. It's cool because they really, they took this game engine and did so much with it. So you've got your regular Sorcerian kind of JRPG fantasy setting, and then in this one, Pyramid Sorcerian, you're taking that same engine, brand new characters, brand new storyline, bringing it into like a Middle Eastern setting. One of the other settings, one of the scenarios, you actually takes place in the future. So you're, playing a Sorcerian style game, but it's on a spaceship and everything is futuristic. So they really took this game engine and milked it for all it was worth. Not only did you get a whole lot of gameplay, you bought the base game and then you bought all these extra, scenario discs for a discounted price, but they all had amazing original soundtracks. So for this whole Sorcerian and the 5 different extra scenario packs that you can get, there's like a collection of like 120 something pieces of FM music
that's amazing,
are just a joy to listen to. Yeah, and this one just really grabbed me because I really felt like, again, it had that Falcom sound and those like Middle Eastern flares kind of reminded me a little bit of like the Bomberman stuff, where she adds a little bit of Middle Eastern stuff here and there but keeps it Bomberman. This was very similar. It keeps it Falcom but also adds in a little bit of that flair. So thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I definitely got that vibe.
Yeah, for sure. All right, sir, so what you got next for us?
All right, we are going to pivot away from Ys but into another classic Falcom series. This is Determination of Fight from The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, the third evolution, which was originally released in Japan in 2007, then ported to the PSP in 2008, and then this is from the HD remaster on the PS3 in 2013, then on the Vita in 2016. Originally composed by Ryo Takashita from the Falcom sound team, and this arrangement is by Mitsuyo Singa or Shinshuki Minami.
Okay, The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, the third evolution HD remaster. You gotta love those long titles.
Love it, yeah, totally.
All right, we'll be right back.
Welcome back. That was Determination of Fight from The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, the third evolution. Originally released in 2007, 2008 on the PSP, and then this is from the HD remaster on the PS3 in 2013, and then the Vita in 2016. Composed by Ryo Takashita, arranged by Mitsuyo Singa or Shunsuke Miname of the Falcom Sound Team JDK. Ed, what did you think?
I loved it. It actually reminded me more of like a Grasshopper Manufacturer, like Suda 51 game, like No More Heroes or something, where they have those really high energy but very like loungy at the same time kind of tracks. This was very jazzy and very fun. I got, whirlwind montages of like casinos and stuff running through my head when I heard this one. There was a little bit of like jingly Christmas stuff in the background as well, along with the pianos and that really, really crisp drum kit. So good stuff all around.
Yeah, I love the jazzy elements of it. I love that it's exciting. This is actually the battle track, so you hear this every time you get into a battle in a turn-based RPG. Okay. And if you've heard other Trails in the Sky games, they all have this sort of like really upbeat, like eclectic, jazzy sound for the battle tracks, which I think is just a totally awesome design choice for this cluster of games.
Yeah, I feel like it would kind of keep you grooving and a little bit calm as you're in these high energy, kind of tense situations. So maybe that's on purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Leave it to Falcom to, try to calm you down with their soundtracks as well as pump you up at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me about this game, man. I've never heard of it before.
So The Legend of Heroes spun off of Dragon Slayer, which was an early Falcom game. I think Dragon Slayer
one of the first.
4 or something was Dragon Slayer, The Legend of Heroes. And then from there, they started the Legend of Heroes games. And then that sort of is where this trilogy comes from. There's a set of games people call the Crossbell Arc, which is 2 games. And then Legend of Heroes is also where Trails of Cold Steel sits. And so this basically takes place before Trails of Cold Steel, and there's tons of references to this game in the later half of the Trails of Cold Steel tetralogy, which I just like. I was going to work that word in one way or another because I just think it's a cool word. But I played all through Trails of Cold Steel, and so going back, I'm like, oh, this feels like where this series began. Like there's so many references. And now that I finished Trails of Cold Steel series, I have a different appreciation playing this game because I know where these characters will wind up in their lives. But this is like the beginning and that kind of thing. So that's my history with here. I have all 3 of them. I got to get through them. That's one of my 2022 resolutions is to play these games by the end of the year.
That's cool. Sounds good. I was trying to, when I was gathering up all the music for the show, I think I accidentally downloaded the Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky soundtrack instead of the Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky Third Evolution soundtrack, thinking that they would have been the same. I didn't realize the Third Evolution had a completely different arranged soundtrack, and so I did listen to I guess it was the original version of this tune, which was actually really cool. It was actually a little bit more electronic, and the bass line was very kind of like house dance style, and the piano was a little more house piano. It was a fun kind of dance interpretation. Well, I guess this is the jazz interpretation of the original song. But it was funny because melodically they were super close together, just the instrumentation was very different. And I was kind of amazed at how different it sounded just based on, changing up the instruments. The original song sounded more like a battle song to me, more like a traditional Final Fantasy style battle song. Yep. And then the instrumentation here makes it sound more like, a super arranged kind of Falcom piece of music. So it was fun kind of seeing the evolution of this, too.
Yeah, definitely. When I was picking my tracks and going through, I saw some comments on this song where people were saying, this one's it's too crazy and whatever. And other people are like, no, they should go as crazy as they want. Just get along for the ride. But I agree with you. The original, it's not muted, but it is definitely more targeted with those. It does have a more electronic undertone. This has a clear like jazz fusion, like, but again, it just feels like they're just fully leaning into the jazz in this version.
Yeah, definitely. What kind of games are these in this series? Is it just like a turn-based, or is it action RPG?
These are turn-based, where you can on the left-hand side see the next like 10 turns.
Oh.
And you have delay timers, and so some of your turns can cause enemies to like shift down in the order, and so there's a lot of strategy around seeing the order of turns, as opposed to like Final Fantasy, which kind of has that battle gauge, and you just sort of like, it's your turn when the gauge comes up. You always know whose turn is coming.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of tactics built into that kind of stuff. Yep. Almost like a game of chess.
And the battle system, you're on sort of it's kind of like a grid. It's not like tactics style where you like move and then you take your turn. It's more like if older Star Ocean or Tales games, you weren't active, but it's the same sort of grid notion where like you're going to move and take your turn. If you're too far, you can't attack. You got to use magic and that kind of thing.
Okay, I get you. So much more advanced version of like the Chrono Trigger battle system. Where you
exactly.
Kind of
but yeah, because in Chrono Trigger, you don't necessarily have to manage, here are the next 10 turns, and here's where this action will leave me on the battlefield. But that is a massive part of all the Trails games battle systems.
Interesting. Okay. So, wow, it's like a cross between a whole bunch of stuff, because I'm even getting kind of like XCOM vibes from that, too, where you've got, distance and your relationship to other characters definitely depends.
Oh, yeah.
Or determines how you're going to act against them. So
right, like you might want to move
cool.
your magic attack, right, your healer as far back on the battlefield as possible,
but still within reach of your guys.
Ramp up an evasion tank and someone who can just sort of like sit in front of the enemies, and so the enemies are going to be trying to get them but can't. And then there's all these different sort of strategies, and then there'll be enemies that are like, I can hit you no matter what. Doesn't matter if you can evade. And then you got to like figure out a whole new plan.
I am very glad there are people out there that enjoy these kind of games, so I don't have to. I like watching them, but too many decisions. All right, so let's move on to my next pick of the show. We're going to listen to a track called Prison. This is from Brandish 2, The Planet Buster Renewal. So this is a kind of an enhanced arranged version of the original Brandish 2 Planet Buster game. This was released on the PC 98 in 1995. Composed by Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Masaru Nakajima, Mieko Ishikawa, Naoki Kaneda, and Takahiro Tsushihima. Be right back. All right, you've just broken out of prison from Brandish 2, the Planet Buster Renewal, released on PC 98 in 1995, composed by... Actually, this song particularly was composed by Naoki Kaneda. The rest of the soundtrack was composed by him and Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Masaru Nakajima, Mieko Ishikawa, and Takahiro Tsunejima. And a large amount of composers there. I did happen to find the liner notes for the official release of the soundtrack, which kind of delineated all of the composers. Mieko Ishikawa seemed to have done the large majority of the music for the game, but the additional composers all had at least 3 or 4 tracks each. And I liked this one in particular because of it's got kind of like it's low key but upbeat at the same time. Again, feels very Falcom. I picked a lot of these because they just kind of really feel Falcom to me. But I get kind of like a upbeat but like a town feel as well. I don't know, what vibes did you get from this one?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was into it, and then the bridge about 90 seconds in, I was like, this is like pure fire. Like, it's just like, They just kind of like went out, they just like let themselves go for a bit, and then it goes back to being minimal, but they just start banging on the harpsichord, and I'm like, oof, chef's kiss. This is like, that's well done. Well done.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't get a vibe for like where this song would play, because it's got that town feel, but then it's also got that like final boss feel halfway through it, and then comes back down and feel again. But that real intense part kind of in the middle there really throws you off guard, but at the same time you're like, all right, I can definitely feel this. So
yeah, definitely.
Interesting stuff.
That again, like that sort of like, let's just see where this takes us sort of bridge solo thing is such a Falcom trademark. It's just sort of like, it makes sense while you're in it, but it's also like, it feels a little out of control, but you want it to just keep going.
Yeah, definitely. And the nice thing about Falcom games is that they end up getting ported to so many different systems. So if you like a track, you have like probably 4 or 5 different versions to listen to, at least for the classic games. So, there's a Super Famicom version of this song, there's a PC 88 version of this song. So you can like pick and choose your favorite version of your favorite tracks on each game's soundtrack and kind of mix and match a soundtrack comprised of a whole bunch of different consoles. And I love kind of doing that and then shuffling them in like an audio player on my PC and stuff. So it's good that they give you so much variety there. Yeah,
and as you said earlier, right, they do such a good job sort of retaining the essence of the track, but using the new tools to sort of maybe change instrumentation or add a few, like, not bells and whistles, but just sort of like production value or something, but it always still feels like the core and the essence of that track is still there.
Yeah, exactly. And then the reason why this is called Brandish 2, the Planet Buster Renewal, is because this is a slightly updated version of the original PC 88 game, and the music was just slightly updated, I guess. They used a new sound driver. They're using the OPNA chip instead of the original OPN chip. Most of the instrumentation remained the same, except they added some additional like percussion, because the OPNA chip had sampled percussion and not just like the little clicks and clacks from the noise channel on the YM2203. So you got some extra stuff going on there. The game itself was a enhancement of the original Brandish game engine, and Brandish as a series is kind of unique in the sense that it's a top-down action RPG game. You might, liken it to a game like Zelda, except it's weird in that your character only moves upwards. So when you turn, the map turns with you. So you're always facing north on the screen. And you either love it or you hate it, and there's a lot of controversy as to whether this is a good system or not, because it doesn't really, the systems that it was on didn't really use like hardware scaling and rotation, so it was pretty much kind of a janky 3 frames, boom boom boom, you're facing 90 degrees, boom boom boom, you're facing 90 degrees again. So it got very disconcerting. But at the same time, the animation was great because they only had to draw all of the monsters facing downward and your hero only facing upward. So they saved a lot of memory on sprite artwork and different directions that you could face. So there were some trade-offs there. I don't know. I've seen video of this. I haven't played it myself. There is an English translation of this game for the PC-98 version and the Super Famicom version. So I might want to check it out just to check out this weird kind of system they've got going on.
Yeah, I can imagine it based on how you're describing it and what was going through my mind. I'm like, well, that's the setting I use on my car's GPS, but that experience is like wholly different than trying to like map your way around this kind of game.
Absolutely, because everything is up. Oh yeah, where do you go? You go north. Okay. Yeah, and to get to the opposite direction, you go north.
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine like if you actually have to traverse places, I feel like one of the Shining games that was on the Saturn had this like dungeon crawler explorer view where you sort of moved forward and then you would turn and then the map would, it was like a first person view. And those games for me, I was always like, I don't want to draw this map by hand. And I'm immediately lost. I'm like, did I turn left 6 times? I'm like, I don't know which direction I'm facing anymore. And I just imagine getting lost because, again, everything looks the same.
We'll leave that to our friend Todd. He's got tons of grid paper at home just filled with dungeons from dungeon crawlers.
Yeah.
Again, I'm glad you love it, so I don't have to.
More power to you, man.
Exactly. They call this one the Planet Buster because at the end of the original Brandish, your character Ares gets a sword from the final boss, and the sword is powerful enough to destroy the planet if you plunge it into the planet. So, obviously a very dangerous weapon, which becomes kind of the center around the whole plot for Brandish 2. There was also a Brandish 3, and I don't know too much about that one. It's called The Spirit of Balkan, but then the series, there was Brandish VT after that, which I think was kind of like a remaster of the original Brandish, and then the series kind of died out. So it wasn't really one of those kind of series that was an offshoot of anything else. It was its own kind of thing. And, it seems interesting. I do want to, like at least in the PC-98 version, there was an auto map. So when you do move around, even though the map rotates, it does draw a map of your
helpful
area, which is nice. And dungeon crawlers that have auto mapping features become immediately more playable when you don't have to, map it all out yourself. So
yeah, I'm only aware of this series because of the music.
Yep, I remember, when I was first getting into like ROMs and stuff and seeing Brandish for some reason it was like everywhere to download for like Japanese Super Famicom ROMs. Maybe because it was a smaller file size or something, I don't know. But I remember trying to play it and was like, this is all Japanese, I can't do anything. And just kind of didn't bother listening to the music.
Everything's North and in Japanese.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know, 16 or 17 years old, whatever. In the bin it goes. So anyways, let's move on to our next track. What you got next?
All right, we're going to go back to Ys. This is All Out Attack from Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, originally released in Japan for the Vita in 2016, and then everywhere on Vita and PS4 in 2017, and then the Switch and PC in 2018. Composed by Mitsuyo Singa, and the guitar is credited to Kosuke Furukawa of the JDK band.
Sweet.
All right, welcome back. That was All Out Attack from Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana, originally released in Japan for the Vita in 2016, then Everywhere in 2017, and then in the Switch and PC in 2018. Composed by Mitsuya Singa, with the guitar by Kosuke Furukawa. I mean, Ed, you can see why the guitarist was credited alongside the composer.
Absolutely.
What did you think?
Like I said, this song goes hard. It is amazing. It starts really proggy and then gets just full on, like, in your face metal. There is a callback to one of my favorite songs from Ys 3, Beasts as Black as Night. Da 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 da. Like, that guitar melody right at the beginning of the song is straight out of that boss music from Ys 3, so I was, like, really into that. And then, like, little keyboard stabs that were, like, in perfect harmony with the guitar, but let the guitar do all the talking, I thought was a really nice touch, too, because it was just a little accentuation here and there. So I really, really like this one.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the first Falcom game I played. This is the song with that track Sunshine Coastline that, like, pulled me in. And then you get to this song. So basically your party is on a deserted island trying to figure everything out, and they do these suppression battles where it basically becomes like a Warriors game where you have to defeat wave after wave after wave of enemies at night when you're in your tent. And this track is the song that plays, and it's like the perfect amount of energy to bring to that kind of thing where you're
definitely
like
this
fighting
has a
through the
Musou
night,
feel,
trying to survive. Yeah,
definitely. I remember back in the Pixel Tune days, Mike was really into this game, and he shared a couple tunes from the soundtrack. And I remember at the time being like, yeah, this sounds really, really good, and I never ended up playing it, but now I'm getting a renewed interest in it again. So, especially now that he didn't say much about that Musou style stuff, but now that I'm hearing about that, it makes me even more willing to go and check it out.
I've played 8 and 9. I have to go back and do some of the earlier ones, but both 8 and 9 have this, like, phase. It is straight out of a Warriors game where, like, you have to defeat, like, 500 enemies and you have, like, 3 minutes and...
piece of cake.
I mean, you're just, like, going ham on waves of enemies and you're, like, racking up scores, and you get raided and you can run them back to get S tier and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really cool element of the game that's, like, again, super different than a regular action RPG, which is what the game mostly is.
I can definitely dig it. I've heard some stuff from this soundtrack, and there are a lot of callbacks to earlier Ys soundtracks, and then there's a lot that's just, like, kind of like brand new. And I don't think I'm familiar enough with a lot of the later Ys soundtracks to know, like, what's a callback and what's not, but considering that there's just, like, a random Ys 3 reference in this song, I'm sure that there's tons and tons of references that I'm not getting as well.
Right, well, even the title that you said, I was like, oh, that totally resonates because you're fighting dark monsters at night.
Oh, yeah.
When this track plays.
Very cool.
Yeah, the only other thing I want to say about this game is it is pronounced Dana, even though it's spelled Dana. I don't want Mike and his gaming linguistics to come after me, but they do say it in the game, and they say it that way, so...
yeah, and it's funny because when we originally shared it on PTR, he hadn't played the game yet, and we were calling it Dana, and then later on, I think he shared it again, and he was like, oh, sorry, it's Dana.
Yeah.
So, he corrected himself. All good. All right, ready for my next one?
I'm ready.
All right, so we talked a little bit about Legend of Heroes. This is a game from the Legend of Heroes 4, A Tear of Vermilion. This is Underground Waterway. This game was released again on the PC 98 in 1996, composed by Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Masaru Nakajima, Mieko Ishikawa, Naoki Kaneda, and Satoshi Arai. I'm sure a lot of those names sound familiar from my last track. All right, that was Underground Waterway from The Legend of Heroes 4, A Tear of Vermilion, released on the PC 98 in 1996, composed by Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Masaru Nakajima, Mieko Ishikawa, Naoki Kaneda, and Satoshi Arai. Probably my most chill track in terms of like Underground Waterway. I feel like this is a very kind of blue azure, like not necessarily a sewer, but kind of like maybe like a wading pool, like something you can just kind of sit on a floaty and kind of chill out for a bit. I don't know, what feel did you get from this track?
The thing I wrote down was like, I feel like there's a sewer or a watery dungeon all the time in these games. And so that's the vibe. It was like a little spooky, maybe eerie, but like not over the top danger or fear that would like stop you from forging on. It actually gave me a weird, like, what if this track played in Earthbound when you were going to fight Belch? Like, it's obviously a wholly different vibe, but I'm like, man, I could imagine that track playing there and fitting with the same sort of like sewery, watery dungeon kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I like this track because it feels much different than a lot of the other tracks that you and I both picked for this show. And I kind of set it like in the middle of the show because I feel like it's just a good kind of a chill out. You know, there's a lot of crazy guitars going on and a lot of really high amp energy stuff. And this one is just like a perfect kind of like chill out track. It lets you kind of like refresh yourself before we ramp things back up again. I like the fact that it's got a steady beat and a really kind of groovy pumping bass line, but the keys over it are just so smooth and they kind of flow like waves. So I haven't actually seen where in this game this music takes place, but I feel like there would be like animated waves. Like this is a great song for like Hammock to play on KVGM. You know, it's like really chill music.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you and I are getting the same like general mental picture, so like they were definitely putting out a vibe, and I feel like it's landed.
We're picking it up. We're picking up what they're putting down. That's for sure. So we've been talking a lot about remakes and re-releases of games. This game also got re-released on the PSP in 2006, I think, for its like 20th anniversary. It was just called Legend of Heroes: A Tear of Vermilion. They dropped the 4. And this was the first Legend of Heroes game to be released in the US since the original Legend of Heroes, which came out on the TurboGrafx 16 in like 93 or 94 or something. So it was like a reintroduction of the series to US audiences, which was cool. And then they, of course, rearranged the entire soundtrack for the PSP as well. You know, but I'm a chiphead, so I love the FM stuff.
Yeah.
Much more. And this track on the PSP sounds great as well. They really did kind of run with that whole watery theme. But this one, I don't know, I like it because I love songs that do a lot with very little. And this one is a great example of that.
I think they executed what they were intending excellently.
Exactly. I don't have much to say about the game itself. It's kind of like your standard turn-based RPG. The art is absolutely fantastic. For pixel art, like the backgrounds and the characters themselves are incredibly detailed. The animation and the movement is a little choppy. There's not a lot of smooth scrolling or movement. But man, you look at these screens on the PC 98 and it just blew me away with how crazy detailed every single like square inch of screen was. I think at this point Falcom was really like coming into their own and really getting like the best of the best in terms of artists and composers and game creators. And they were really kind of like showing off like the absolute pinnacle of what the PC 98 could put out at the time. So if you don't want to play the game, it didn't get very good reviews in terms of gameplay, but definitely go check out some like video on YouTube of the PC 98 version of Legend of Heroes 4, and I think you'll be pretty impressed with what you see.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. All right, sir, what do you have next for us?
All right, well, I'm going to ramp it back up, so this was a good chill break there. We're going to listen to Inevitable Struggle from Zero no Kiseki, also known as Trails from Zero. Originally released in Japan on the PSP in 2010, the Vita in 2012, PC and PS4 after that. It's set finally for a North America release on PC, PS4, and Switch this year. I just pre-ordered it, can't wait.
Nice.
This is composed by Masanori Osaki of the Falcom sound team JDK. Welcome back. That was Inevitable Struggle from Zero no Kiseki, aka Trails from Zero. Originally released in Japan on the PSP, the Vita, PC, PS4. Finally coming to North America this year, composed by Masanori Osaki. I mean, I said I was going to ramp it back up, and I hope that delivered.
You did in spades. Differently led song, definitely a lot of keyboards here. It was relentlessly upbeat. Like, there were a lot of resolutions or build-ups where I was like, okay, now they're finally going to go halftime and kind of like break the song down, and it never happened. It just kept that intensity through and through and through, and I was like, wow, okay, when do I catch my breath? And it never happened. But it was great. There was just a lot of really fun melodies. It didn't change the sound up too much. Sometimes a little more guitar came in, sometimes there was a little more keyboard, but all in all, it just kept a really, really good tempo and a really good vibe all the way through.
Yeah, like I said, so this game comes out for us, finally, this year. So I haven't played this one, but when I was doing a little bit of research, what I was able to deduce from like YouTube comments and things was that this plays, it sounds like in at least 2 places in the game, but that vibe that you just described is like perfect, because what they basically said is your party has to like defend this whole thing from waves of enemies. There's NPCs and people like cheering you on, because it's like, look, we don't know that you can make it, but like you're standing up for us, and like you just got to keep going, and you just got to make it to the end. And so there's that like, just keep going, we're all with you, like this is one of the final pushes. And I feel like again, like with that, when's it gonna slow down, when can we have a break, it's like, no, not now.
Yeah, exactly. Wave after wave after wave of sound, wave after wave of enemies, perfectly in sync with each other. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the Zero in the name, or the Trails from Zero. Is this like a predecessor to the Trails series, or?
I don't know where the Zero precisely comes in. So Trails in the Sky is the first Trails set of games. This is the first game in the Crossbell arc, which overlaps with the end of Trails in the Sky the Third and the beginning of Trails of Cold Steel. And then the Crossbell characters, and Crossbell becomes an important continent and player at the end of the Trails of Cold Steel. So they all kind of like, they're not perfectly like this one, then this one. It's kind of like the MCU if you went back and watched it in like chronological order, where it's like, hey, by the way, while that was happening, this is also happening.
Man, I thought Doctor Who time travel was hard to follow.
If you basically remember that it's like, it's a pretty similar sort of like, these characters all exist at the same time, so it has to happen within a set of years where like these people would be alive in their like prime of their lives, but they're happening in different countries on this continent. And that's sort of like, it all comes together at the end of Trails of Cold Steel.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm sure there's a wiki with a timeline somewhere that makes it much more easy.
Well, and the game is like, you could go get a PhD in like Trails lore. I mean, there's like libraries with like volumes of things that are only there if you want it. Like you don't have to.
Gotcha.
You don't have to do it at all. But it's like unending amount of information.
That's cool. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, this song itself is great. Are you familiar with the rest of the soundtrack, even though you haven't played the game? Or
yeah, it has more of this. So like the Trails in the Sky has that, in my opinion, like that overtly jazz vibe, right? That we heard earlier, and then this one has more. It's like Crossbell feels more futuristic. It's more focused on technology, so it has that. It embraces more synths. It uses more almost EDM sort of elements in some of the spots. So that's the vibe I get there. They all, again, like have a pretty similar, cranked up to 11, and then they've got their chill versions. I obviously picked all the cranked up to 11 songs that I could find. But it has a pretty nice evolution from like Trails in the Sky being jazzy and like more wildernessy and like less technology oriented, Crossbell being the most technology oriented in all the countries in this continent. So I feel like they grabbed that pretty hard.
I see that Osaki also worked on Ys 7 soundtrack, so probably some less technological stuff there, and then kind of ramping up.
Yeah,
for this one, but really hasn't been working with Falcom for too long, only since 2008, and like one soundtrack every other year or so. But definitely putting his all into every single piece of music, as if this is anything to go by.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know this song loops a lot, but the outro before the loop is probably my favorite part. The drums kick up just a little bit.
Yep.
It just feels like a natural sort of like, all right, but you got to keep going kind of element.
Yeah, exactly. All right, ready for my next track?
I'm ready.
All right, so this is my last FM track of the show, and it's interesting. It's a little experimental. It's again pretty low key. Might not be for everybody, but I really enjoy it. So if you don't, I don't know, screw off. This is the Uninvited Visitors' Dubious Island from Sorcerian Forever. This was released for PC in 1997. Composed by, again, Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Mieko Ishikawa, Satoshi Arai, and Yuzo Koshiro, finally. All right, let's take a listen. All right, that was The Uninvited Visitors' Dubious Island from Sorcerian Forever, released on the PC in 1997, composed by Atsushi Shirakawa, Hirofumi Matsuoka, Mieko Ishikawa, Satoshi Arai, and Yuzo Koshiro. And like I said, it's a little bit experimental, very, very low-key, kind of unique for an FM track, and I think it really leans on instrumentation quite a bit. What'd you think of this one, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, dubious indeed. I mean, it was good. I thought it was interesting at the beginning, right? It was very minimal. The big change, like towards the end, felt like a build up before it was going to end. That part I thought was super interesting and really pulled me back in. So I really liked that, where the drums were going up. So it felt like a little bit of slight key change a bit.
Yeah, it got a little marchy in there.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like this would be a great track to just kind of put in my headphones and fall asleep. Kind of like a really low vibe, Tim Fallon feel on those really bendy, sweepy lead keyboard melodies. And it's just got that kind of a bluesy, jazzy feel to it almost. And then there's some real those arpeggios are kind of 80s new wave, ballad kind of stuff going on. So it's kind of very much a product of its time, I think, in terms of musicality. As an RPG soundtrack song, though, I'm really interested to see where this might fit into the game, because it doesn't feel like VGM to me that much.
Yeah, it's not obvious like some of the others where you're like, oh, I could imagine doing this or being there or having this kind of thing. It gave me a little bit, as you said, how you would listen to it. It feels like I might listen to it in the same way I listen to down tempo or deep house, where I'm at work, I'm cranking on a thing that I just kind of need to kind of pay attention to, and I just need something to give me a very chill vibe. That would probably serve the same purpose.
Legit. And I think, I think I've been looking for a lot of chill out music in my life lately, because I'm at a very high stress point in my life right now. So I think just subconsciously, I'm really kind of attaching myself to music like this. And as I've been picking for the show, so you're kind of seeing an outlet for my stress as we go through these picks. It's funny. I didn't even think about it like that. Anyways, this game runs in Windows 95. It uses the YMF 262 sound chip, otherwise known as the OPL3, and I think it's basically like an FM chip that was made specifically for PCs and Windows PCs and DOS PCs, and has some unique elements where it can do half sawtooths and half sine waves that a lot of the other chips weren't capable of at the time, so you do get some really unique instruments from it, which is why I think you hear some sounds in this those chords are kind of gritty but also kind of smooth. I think you're looking at kind of a half sawtooth there, where you've got some smoothness but also a little bit of bite to it, but not as much as you would get from a really farty Genesis song or something like that. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, I wonder how this song would even work on the Genesis, because it has so much low tones, that bass is doing so much work. I feel like this is well crafted for where it is, the platform it's on.
Yeah. I don't think it would be as smooth on other sound chips unless you had a really intense, talented sound creator and a good sound driver to really kind of handcraft instruments for you. But I think the OPL3 could do these kind of instruments pretty easily. Anyways, so Sorcerian Forever. I'll just actually read a little bit of the blurb translated from the Japanese, from an advertisement that I found. It says, 10 years after the release of the original, a next-generation sequel to the classic RPG Sorcerian is released. As in the original, you control a party of 4 player-generated characters through side-scrolling dungeons, hoping to solve a series of quests divided across standalone scenarios. The game features 5 brand new scenarios and an updated graphics engine, which nonetheless uses the same side-scrolling control scheme as in the original game, with some additional controls for direct magic use and a new HUD interface. So yeah, they updated the graphics. Some might say that they are not as good as the original, and I'm one of those people. They're higher resolution, but they look a little more cartoony. There's less pixelization, but there's also less detail in them. So it's a little unfortunate. I think maybe the color palette they were working with was not as diverse as on the PC-98, so a little bit was lost in there, but the scrolling was much more smooth. There's improvements in the gameplay and the control, and like I just read, the magic system has been improved for more like real-time usage instead of having to navigate through menus while you're also, fighting enemies in real time in like an action scenario. So overall, I think it plays better, it just doesn't look as good, plus you get extra content. So I think all in all, the pros outweigh the cons in this game. It never got translated to English, unfortunately. There is a patch on romhacking.net where there's a translation that translates the menus and like a couple of the pieces of dialogue at the beginning of the game, but it didn't go so far as to translate all of the dialogue in the game and stuff like that. So, you'll have an easier time kind of navigating the menus, but you're still going to have to rely on like a translation from GameFAQs or something on your phone to help you with the English dialogue there. That kind of takes away a lot from the game too.
Yeah, for sure.
It's unfortunate, but Sorcerian, it's got a great wealth of awesome music. Like I said, there's like 120 tunes from the original series. You've got the OPL3 stuff from this game. You've got the later stuff from the remakes and tons of arrangement soundtracks. So if you enjoy RPG music and haven't really explored the Sorcerian soundtracks, definitely go take a look, because there's a lot of really good stuff composed by, like I said, Mieko Ishikawa, Yuzo Koshiro, all of these really like grandfathers and grandmothers of the Falcom music sound team. So it's good stuff, and you'll learn a lot about those composers along the way as well. All right, sir, I think we're got your last track of the show. What's next?
My final pick is Norse Wind from East 9 Monstrum Nox, released in Japan for the PS4 in 2019, and then worldwide for PS4, Switch, and PC in 2021. This track was also composed by Mitsuyo Singa. Let's take a listen. All right, welcome back. That was Norse Wind from East 9 Monstrum Nox, released in Japan for PS4 in 2019, then everywhere on the PS4, Switch, and PC in 2021, composed by Mitsuyo Singa. I was saying I didn't realize how much Mitsuyo Singa's music spoke to me until I started to do the composer credits and realized 3 out of the 5 tracks I picked, he's got his fingerprints on. So whatever he's doing, it's resonating.
Yeah, but I don't think that you would easily be able to tell if you didn't know. Like you said, you picked the songs without really considering the composers that much, and I don't think you would have picked them, had you known that they were all the same. But even listening to like All Out Attack, that's a very different sounding song than this. Like, I think they have the same energy and they're kind of in the same genre-ish, but this one kind of reminded me more of like a straight up rock metal song. I got like Guilty Gear vibes from it, whereas like All Out Attack definitely had more prog stuff and was a little bit more dynamic in terms of instrumentation, so he's not writing the same style of music over and over again. He's definitely got a lot of chops, and he can differentiate his sound even when he's kind of trying to get the same message across.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see why this one probably also needs a guitar credit, because they went hard on their their guitar pieces here.
Definitely.
I think the sax went just as hard, though. I think I like the sax part better. Or I should say, it's probably my favorite part of the track is when that sax comes in, because it's just so different.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's not something that you always get in a soundtrack like this. And I don't know why they don't use... saxophone has more of like a jazz blues mentality to it, but when you mix it with like hard rock guitar, for some reason the tones just sound great together. They have like a similar kind of like intonation to them. So when you throw saxophone into a hard rock or a metal song, it really works for some reason. I don't think people do it enough.
Yeah, look, if it gives off this vibe, I'm like, bring it on. I will take as much as you're going to put out there.
Exactly. So let's see, Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. I remember most of the game takes place like in just one kind of giant area, right? It's very different from a lot of other games. Yeah,
exactly. So I played it last year. I loved it. As far as I can tell, because again, I haven't played the whole Ys series, right? But it is different in both how it plays itself out and the setting. It's got a sort of Victorian vibe to it. So a lot of the music has more. It could live in the Castlevania ecosystem, like that kind of vibe to it. It's got that like that kind of harpsichord and those sorts of things. And then the way the game works is, again, like Adol has amnesia and he's got to like sort it out, and he winds up in this like adventure or whatever. And in previous Ys games, you sort of like explore, and then you can't explore anymore, and then you meet someone, and then they're like, oh, let's go over here. This one, you're like stuck in the town, and there's barriers, and so you have to basically work with this other main character who can break the barrier, but you have to like go into this other dimension and like defeat a bunch of monsters to break down the barrier. Yep. And then you can go further and further. But most of the game, you're literally just in the city. And this song plays one of the first times you get to literally get outside, and you're like in a field and you're finally exploring. You're not in the city. So that's, again, like, I love those tracks of like, let's go on an adventure. And this felt like really the first time you got to do that. And this track delivered on that vibe again.
Yeah. Okay. I can definitely see that now. This feels like freedom. So I can understand having that kind of notion of, oh my God, I'm finally out of this area. And then also hearing this music must feel even more energetic and more rewarding to the player. So yeah, that's cool.
Because again, the city is like, it's stone and it's dark, and you go in like underside of the city, and then there's this like tunnel and a prison, and the whole city is basically built around this prison. So and then you get here, and this is like, it feels like some of the older Ys games where it's green, there's fields, there's like animal type monsters, and you can just go.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I remember when I watched the reviews, it felt very gray. Everything was like one shade of stone gray. So getting out into fields must feel like, again, a breath of fresh air in more ways than one, both visually and mentally. So
yeah. And this game felt way more linear than like Memories of Celceta or Ys 8 that I played, insofar as it felt like almost episodic, insofar as they were like, okay, now here's sort of the origin story and why this person joined your party. Now here's the origin story and then the sort of like why this person's going to join your party.
Oh, okay.
And there's sort of like two parallel things happening, and you sort of like, you do this part, then you go back and this part moves forward, and you come back. And so it was like way more linear in that way and that's why I think it gets like mixed sort of vibes from people who've played all the East, because it does seem very different as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about linearity in RPGs if it's done well. Like, Mother 3 is a great example of a RPG style game that kind of really keeps you on a steady course that you can't deviate much from, and it was one of my favorite RPGs of all time. So I don't have any problems with games like that. And this is one of those games where I was like, I was interested in only because I don't know, just the people, I heard Purnell talking about it, and I heard, Mike Levy talking about it, and I'm like, all right, I should probably get into Ys at some point. And this came out, and everybody in reviews just kind of got hung up with, you spend so much time in this town, and I was like, do I really want to like stick there? As somebody who struggles with getting into RPGs myself, like, is this going to just be too much for me to handle?
Yeah, I mean, again, like based on what you and I have even talked about, I would say Ys 8 might be more, or even Salsetta might be more a better entry point.
Yeah,
because this game, again, my experience was this game is trying to tell me a very specific story.
Right.
And you got to be all in on this story, because like that is this game. And Lacrimosa of Dana and Ys of Salsetta were like, this game is trying to make you have an adventure.
Okay.
And again, like that's why it feels different and why it feels more linear, because the game is like, no, this is what comes next, and then this is what comes next, and then you're going to do this.
Interesting. I mean, I'm big on story too. Like, walking sims is one of my favorite genres, and that's like almost all story and no action. So it's going to be a balance. How it's balanced, I think, is going to determine whether or not I'm really into it or not. So yeah, maybe I'll check it out and we'll see.
I think you should play this game. I think everyone should play this game. So
I at least want to listen to the rest of the music too, because this track rocks. All right, so we're going to end on something a little uncharacteristic for me soundtrack-wise, and one of the most obscure Falcom games out there. This is A Folk Dance of Shadows and Shimmers from the forest area of Vantage Master. This was a Japanese Windows-only release in 1997, composed by a lot of our favorites: Atsushi Shirakawa, Masaru Nakajima, Satoshi Arai, Hayato Sonoda, and Kanami Ohara, who is not Irish. That was A Folk Dance of Shadows and Shimmers from the Forest level from Vantage Master, released on Windows in 1997, and then later there was a remastered version on the PSP, which I actually just found out about. It was composed by the Falcom sound team JDK, including Atsushi Shirakawa, Masaru Nakajima, Satoshi Arai, Hayato Sonoda, and Kanami Ohara. This is probably, I guess, the most RPG tune we've played so far in this whole show of RPG soundtracks. I guess the most traditionally RPG sounding tune. Very orchestral, very marchy. I got a lot of Squaresoft soundtrack out of this one. What'd you think of it, Chris?
Oh, 100%. I wrote down, has a massive FF4, FF6 SNES vibe. So I heard that loud and clear.
Yeah, I don't know. It had a great pace to it. It was very marchy, but the melodies were satisfying. All the runs kind of resolved in a very satisfying way. The instrumentation was great. The PSP version had a remastered version of the soundtrack with actual orchestral instruments, and I don't know. I really like the instrument set that they used in this, and I just felt that the synthesized versions, it sounded better to me. But I'm really into electronic music, so maybe that's the reason why. But I appreciated this piece of music a lot for what it was, and that it felt marchy and kind of upbeat, but also wasn't so stress-inducing like a march usually is. It just had a very relaxing marchy feel, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Is that kind of like the vibe you got from it too?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you're right on. I think anyone who grew up with Squaresoft RPGs is going to feel right at home here, right? And the box art, even from the YouTube link or whatever that we were listening to, right? Samurai, swords, castles, like, I get all those vibes, right? And it feels right at home.
Legit. So you might be familiar with Vantage Master.
So, well, interestingly, I kind of assumed it must have been a Falcom game, but Falcom does this where they put massive Easter eggs in their games, and so I am familiar with Vantage Masters because it is the card game you play in Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4, which is a major sort of mini game, and I played Tokyo Xanadu EX last year. Vantage Masters is an unplayable arcade game in the arcade that you go to.
Oh, interesting.
So I was like aware of this, but didn't actually know it was a real game. I thought it was like a thing that they sort of made up for these games.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's cool. I don't think... So it's not actually a card game, the original version. The original version is more like a Tactics Ogre kind of RPG. You are the master of these natials, which are like kind of like your minions, and you're basically facing another master with their own natials, and basically the object is to be the last one standing on the board, and it's a hex grid, so you're just running around on all these hexagons, very similar to like your traditional tactics game. So not much in the way of like innovation in terms of tactics, but this was also kind of like one of the first ones out there, so it was really kind of paving the way for the rest of them.
That's basically exactly how the card game plays.
Oh, okay. I just think this probably, I don't know if it still uses cards though. I think it might use like rolls of the dice or just turn-based or something.
Yeah, because in the card game you pick like a captain that has a certain amount of hit points and like an ability, and then you draw, and then you play different cards that have different characters, and you have buffs and debuffs and those sorts of things. Okay. And the whole point is to take out the other captain.
Okay, yeah, so maybe it is very, very similar. That's really interesting. I was also reading that on the PSP version, which was released in 2008, featured characters from the Sora no Kiseki series of games. So they were kind of adding in characters from their more contemporary series to the original version of Vantage Master. So they were kind of like, trying to get people interested by adding more stuff in there. But again, this is just... It's one of the more obscure ones because the Japanese consumer market wasn't really that into Windows 95 stuff. There were a lot of other Japanese computers out there that ran other operating systems. This was also released in South Korea and Taiwan, but never even came close to getting a North American release. I think most people that probably played Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4 were not even, didn't even realize that this was based on an original game.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of cool. Do you remember like this song from those games? Did they have any music that sounded like it was like out of place and maybe from an earlier game when you were playing the card game in those games?
Not that I recall. I'm trying to think of like, you have to play a lot of cards, and if you want to platinum it, you got to like play all the cards perfectly and whatever. But
Gotcha.
so you wound up hearing that song a lot, but I feel like it had like like a track that would fit in the game, like you were playing a mini game with a friend.
Okay, so they might have done like an arrangement of it in a Falcom,
exactly.
More modern Falcom style or something like that. But that being said, the entire soundtrack sounds like this. So if you want like a throwback to like old 16-bit RPG, SNES style stuff, definitely take a listen to this soundtrack, and you can find it on YouTube, and you get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It was hard for me to pick a song because they were all just really well composed, very kind of like relaxing tunes like this. They're all meant for like a slower paced tactical RPG, so you're not going to get screechy guitars or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I was into it.
Excellent. So I felt this was a great track to go out of the show with to kind of wind things down after all the, blood pumping guitars and stuff. So I'm glad you liked it. It's a great way to kind of round out the whole sound of Falcom because they've got just so much going on in their soundtracks. It's not even funny. Like I've mentioned the Falcom sound a couple times, and I think when I think of Falcom sound, I think of like, the harder rocking guitars with some really complex melodies, but there's just so much more to that as well. And I'm sure you can attest to that probably even more than I can.
I said this when I was talking to Alex and whenever I talk to folks about these types of games, because I'm basically getting a reputation of being moderately obsessed with Trails of Cold Steel / the expanded universe. But they just do such a great job delivering on the particular vibe they're trying to give you, right? So the set out your door on an adventure, the I don't know that we can make it through, something happens and now I believe again, like all those kinds of moments. Like there's the battle theme, then there's this battle but it's with someone you don't want to be battling, then there's the I don't know that we're going to survive this one. Like they just deliver on all of those very particular vibes in a way that feels cohesive and intentional throughout the whole company, which is amazing, right? I mean, even Advantage Masters, I'm like, oh, I know that, but not because of the game. I know it because they planted it in my head playing another game.
Yeah. They're going to make you aware of it one way or another, by God.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's funny, and then you can kind of go back and look at the original game and be like, oh, you see all those elements that they brought into, more modern games that you didn't even know had a root somewhere, back in 1997 that other people were aware of, so.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, they once you start to play them, you notice they do that a lot. I mean, Tokyo Xanadu, you had to do a claw machine, and you got little plushies that were like from other games. It was like, oh, here's the Reen plushie from Trails of Cold Steel.
And people might consider that like a lot of fan service, but I really think like with Falcom and Nintendo and Sega and a lot of these companies that have long storied histories, that they really look back on their past games and their past characters with reverence and love finding new ways to use them in their games. And so, like we're talking about Falcom doing it with Vantage Master, that it means a lot to both the fans and says a lot about the company and its respect of its own past.
Totally. Now I'm super curious, though, if we can find someone who's ever played Vantage Masters but not Trails of Cold Steel and say, all right, play this card game and let me know if you think it does a good job. It seems like an impossible task, but...
I mean, I'm sure if we were in South Korea or Taiwan or, we'd probably have an easier time, but... Well, I mean, the PSP game is probably a more likely culprit than the Windows 95 Japanese edition game, so not around here anyway. All right, man. So this was fun. I always get like a little bit stressed out when somebody comes to me like with a topic that I'm not too familiar with. And I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to find music for this that I'm really into? And I always end up finding really cool stuff that I never would have found otherwise. So I appreciate you, wanting to do this show with me and introducing me to a lot of really cool like FM music that I would never have, sought out by myself. And then a lot of this modern stuff that's really kick ass that I really enjoy as well. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I am just honored to be able to do that. It feels a little bit like why I like the show so much, right? I mean, that's the experience I get often where I'm like, I don't really know what this is or what it's going to be, but I'm sure it's going to be great, or at least, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to see something I wouldn't have otherwise. So glad to have been able to contribute.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And that's why I like educating people on stuff, because even if you don't like it, at least you can tell people you don't like it and be educated on why you don't like it instead of just like, throw it in the bin, to bring back a saying that we used earlier in the show. But no, that's great. And it's great to be able to learn from other people that are on my show, and to also be able to teach people stuff about I know. And I think sharing knowledge is what podcasts should be all about. So
definitely.
Games and VGM are chock full of that stuff.
For sure.
So, all right. So, to round out the show, I want to thank Indira J for the art, Trevin Hughes for the podcast theme song, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/The VGMbassy. Yes, I am kind of temporarily back on Facebook. I got a Quest 2 VR headset for Christmas, so I had to remake a Facebook account. So I did rejoin my old group that I kind of abandoned. So you might find some posts on there every once in a while. But I'm much more active on Twitter at The VGMbassy. You can go check out the Patreon site at patreon.com/The VGMbassy, or head over to thevgmbassy.com and you'll find links to all of our social media sites and the Discord, where you can hang out with tons of awesome people like our friend Chris Murray here, and talk about games, music, game music. There's always something new happening in the Discord. As always, I'd also like to thank all of our Patreon patrons, starting at the Taurus level with Cameron Shiles, Dan Lawton, aka the Phantomire, Bedroth from the Very Good Music VGM podcast, and our VGM emissaries Chris Murray, thank you sir, Chris Myers, and Chris Steenerson, Mike Stark, aka Ganon11, Jordan Worma, Kyle Kroll, The Dyad, and Daryl Bowers, aka The Last Recon. Our audio attaché members Cameron Worma, Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast, Scott McElhone, and our special agents Ryan Steele and Volt Supreme from Volt Supreme's Synth VGM Dream Stream Machine, and rounding them out, our VG ambassadors Frankly Zappa and the patron saint of VGM podcasts, Alex the Messenger. Whew. All right, guys. So next up is going to be equally energetic, but in a different way. Our pal Rob Nichols from Rhythm and Pixels is going to join me in sharing some amazing music from the DDR series of games, of which he is a huge fan. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Chris, we'll get together again. We'll find another cool topic, and we'll invite you back on soon.
Yeah, love it.
Awesome. All right, so we'll see you guys probably in about a month or so, whenever we get around to it, whenever Rob's available. So take care, everyone. Until then, stay safe and keep listening to awesome VGM.